We have a bombshell twist and a mystery unfolding at this mansion in Texas.
And you're going to have 4 kids, possibly on NyQuil, multiple bottles on scene.
Just a day after law enforcement said they rescued 3 kids from a pond after a mom allegedly drugged them with NyQuil in an alleged effort to potentially kill them, something we were not expecting. The father of the children, who deputies say called 911 and allegedly helped rescue the kids from the water, is now facing a charge. We're on the case presented by LawEnFrome. Law enforcement in Liberty County, Texas, which is more than an hour's drive from Houston, have called this story bizarre. And they also say what they witnessed on scene was breathtaking. And those are 2 words that only add to the mystery that is unfolding here. The newest wrinkle to this story is this mugshot of Domingo Quintana. He's 61 years old, and he's the one who called 911 on Monday and told law enforcement that they needed to come fast. Domingo allegedly told police that his wife, who's 39 years old, drugged their children with NyQuil and tried to drown them and then herself in a pond on their property outside their home. Now, take a look at this home. It is reportedly worth more than $3 million. It's a massive mansion on a big property in Liberty County, Texas, northeast of Houston. Deputies say that Quintana's family bought the property and then built this mansion on it, and they started living there in 2017. It has a massive gate at the entrance, and it reads Rancho Monte Carmelo. Now, I'll tell you what Quintana is now facing in just a moment, but here's what police say they found when they responded to this house early in the morning on Monday. This is per Fox 26 Inches Houston.
That called 911 to report the incident. He stated he heard some commotion in the front yard, possibly yelling from the kids. The father comes outside, calls 911, and it's our belief that the father's the one that pulled some of the kids out of the water.
Deputies say that Quintana's wife, who he said allegedly tried to harm the kids, and his 1-year-old child are both in the hospital in critical condition. 2 other children were taken to the hospital, and they're in stable condition. Those children, 15 years old and 6 years old. Right now, law enforcement say they're working on getting interviews with the children to learn more about exactly what might have happened. ABC 13 Inches Houston has the charging documents that say when investigators were going through the property, they found an emaciated cat. Authorities say that cat was locked in a shop building on the property. It didn't have air conditioning. And they also say there was a bowl with no food or water available. Now that charge that Domingo Quintana is facing is reportedly a misdemeanor. Deputies say they have had to respond to the property in the past, potentially for an assault, but it was unclear who was involved in that. Child Protective Services are now involved in this case, but it's not believed they have had contact in the past with his family. Law enforcement have not released the name of Quintana's wife or the children involved, but before Quintana was arrested, there were several reporters that asked about financial struggles that this family may be having, and what their financial situation was, and whether they could confirm that this family was having issues. Now, law enforcement would not confirm that publicly, but we did find some court documents that may be why people are raising that question. This was a judgment from January of this year, after Domingo Velez Quintana, that's his middle name, was sued in 2023 Inches Harris County. That is where Houston is, and it was in the category of debt, contract fraud, or misrepresentation. Join us now to talk more about this is Police Sergeant Kyle Schoberg, who is the co-host of the Shots Fired podcast. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. And there's still so much we don't know in this story. But you have the dad in this case, and he's the one who called 911. I think of the story he's telling just sounds very traumatic from what he says. His wife potentially trying to harm his kids, but then he gets hit with this misdemeanor animal cruelty charge, which I understand. Animal cruelty is an important thing you have to prosecute, but to do it within 24 hours of all of this happening, what do you make of that decision by law enforcement?
Yeah, so I can understand at face value that does kind of strike somebody as that's a little odd that you would arrest a dad for a misdemeanor charge for animal cruelty when he just saved his children. So I get that. But if I'm putting myself in the lens of a cop or in law enforcement that went to that scene, I would venture to say that they looked at everything as a totality. So what does the conditions of the house look like? I'm sure that told a telling picture of how these kids were living. And so I think that based on all of that big picture, it was a way for them to also place the father in custody. And I'm sure they're still pending whether or not he's involved in the, child neglect or whatever issues that were going on at home with those kids. But I can't picture a law enforcement showing up to this house after him rescuing these kids. He had no involvement in that per se, and then arresting him for this cat. So I think clearly there's a lot more to this story that they're just not releasing at this time.
Yeah, because it's just fascinating with how mysterious all of this is. And then even you have law enforcement said it was bizarre and breathtaking, which I feel like when you have a member of law enforcement just openly saying that, it just raises a lot of issues. And then a couple hours later, we have this unrelated, they were saying, animal cruelty charge. What stands out to you with? It doesn't seem like there's a Ring doorbell, I guess, but not a lot of surveillance cameras on the property. You get this story from the dad who calls 911. What do you do next in law enforcement to figure out what happened?
Well, are we talking about the animal, or are we talking about the kids?
Turning to the NyQuil? Yeah, I mean,
it speaks to how many layers there are in this. But going back to yesterday morning, the dad calls 911 and tells this story about his wife, but there's no surveillance cameras on the property. I guess, as law enforcement, how do you figure out what happened?
Yeah, you just got to kind of build your case from whatever evidence that you have. And if you don't have actual video footage of it, then, you have to, like I just said, you have to build on what evidence do you have. And in reading the article, it says the mom was still in the water. So the kids were on shore, they were wet. I mean, all of that plays a role. I would be curious to know what was the father's role in this. If he had no idea that this had occurred, he walks outside, he sees his kids in this body of water with his mother. There's a lot more to these investigations and pictures than what you're hearing on the media at face value. And so that is the role of law enforcement, is to go back and put all the puzzle pieces together and try to figure out what environment or type of environment are these kids living in. We've seen historically, if those types of calls get mistreated or neglected, then a lot of times these children do end up dead. And so those are very serious cases. And then, of course, you're going to loop in child protective services, and those kids are going to be removed from that home. And likely, they're not going to be issued back to those parents again. And if they do, the parents would have to go through some type of rehabilitation or do their time being incarcerated. And so it's just, those are lengthy investigations.
And then, I just think of the days that it could take to do this. I mean, at the time of this recording, the mom is still in, last time I checked, critical condition, and one other kid is in critical condition. Compared to, I think, in some cases, and if this was a suicide attempt in some ways, you kind of have all the information in one spot. How long does, with what we know at this point, which isn't a lot, could it take to actually build a case? How complicated does this one seem is what I'm trying to ask, compared to, an unfortunate, if it was a murder-suicide, you kind of understand what happened in some cases.
Yeah, honestly, not long. I mean, you can rush toxicology reports, you can have all that stuff in place. The investigators probably already know what occurred that night or day. So really it's just about getting all of your factual evidence, putting that together. But in a case like this, I mean, not long. And usually law enforcement has the answers. They're just not going to release that to the media because, quite frankly, we don't want certain information out there to the media that we are already aware of for various different reasons. But yeah, for the most part, we know what happened. It's just, we're just not going to project that we know what happened.
Yeah, and it was. I wasn't expecting it last night when I saw that was the arrest and what it was for. It's just, and to use police's words, it's just a bizarre case where everyone's trying to figure out what happened. Kyle Schoberg, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime.
Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.